Imagine a prison so massive, so impenetrable, that even El Salvador's most dangerous gangsters, members of MS-13, tremble upon entering. This is El Salvador's pride and scourge of the gang world. CICOT, the mega prison fortress built to contain MS-13 and send a message. Here, El Salvador has committed to ending gang violence by tearing down the empire MS-13 built from blood, fear, and control.
The gang has committed 27 murders. Machetes?
That's their favorite weapon of choice.
13 takes advantage of glaring loopholes in our immigration laws. Pouring in
Violated our borders.
open borders. Let MS-13 all over our
One of the most violent street gangs in the country, the gang is known as Mara Salvatrucha.
CICOT isn't just another high-security facility. It's designed to disrupt the very power structures that gangs use to dominate. Every square inch of its infrastructure screams isolation, control, and surveillance. Housing 40,000 inmates, the prison is engineered to break down gang strongholds in ways other facilities could never achieve. With guard towers that resemble military installations, 15,000-volt electric fences, and walls that stand nearly 40 feet high, this place was built to hold El Salvador's most ruthless criminals indefinitely. For years, MS-13 ruled the streets and the prison yards alike, coordinating crime as though the bars didn't exist. Yet CICOT has shattered that illusion of power. Placed in a remote region, the prison was constructed far from El Salvador's cities, deep in isolation to sever any form of communication with the outside world. Gang leaders, accustomed to running their operations from the safety of a cell, now find themselves in silence, their voices drowned by concrete and steel. Inside, the corridors are narrow, bare, and cold, like an endless labyrinth designed to trap the mind. Inmates are compartmentalized to limit any possibility of gang congregation or planning. For MS-13 members accustomed to wielding influence through intimidation, this isolation is the worst punishment. Gang leaders who once commanded from prison find themselves reduced to silence and shadows, pacing in cells with nothing but bare walls and empty time. The psychological toll is immense. Solitary confinement cells are reserved for those who attempt to assert authority, breaking them further. These rooms, with no windows, no light, no sound except the faint drip of water, echo a kind of emptiness that leaves many inmates with nowhere to turn but inward. Alone in the dark, they're forced to confront a reality without power, cut off from the outside world, and rendered helpless. The entire facility is a testament to President Nayib Bukele's unyielding stance against gang violence. In the past, MS-13 ruled with iron fists, holding communities hostage, demanding taxes from terrified citizens, and executing those who refused. They'd transformed neighborhoods into strongholds, where their grip was nearly as firm as that of the government itself. But Bukele's administration was determined to change that narrative. Constructing CICOT was a symbolic strike at the heart of gang influence, a fortress of containment to break the cycle of crime and fear. To understand why El Salvador went to such extremes, it's essential to consider the roots of MS-13, which trace back to Los Angeles in the 1980s. Salvadoran immigrants, fleeing a brutal civil war, arrived in the United States seeking refuge. But instead of safety, they found themselves in neighborhoods rife with violence, dominated by street gangs. MS-13 was born as a means of self-protection, a band of survivors who would go on to transform into one of the world's most brutal gangs. With mass deportations in the 1990s, MS-13 was sent back to El Salvador, bringing with them the ruthlessness they'd learned on the streets of LA. The gang saw El Salvador, with its struggling economy and broken communities, as fertile ground to plant their roots. They soon became more than just a gang. They were an organized criminal empire with influence that reached far beyond El Salvador's borders. In the early 2000s, El Salvador had one of the highest homicide rates globally, with the gang wars transforming daily life into a nightmare for civilians. Murder, extortion, and fear were their tools, and they wielded them without restraint. By 2015, El Salvador's homicide rate had escalated to a horrifying peak of 100 per 100,000 people, one of the highest in the world. Families lived in fear, communities were crippled, and the nation's streets were soaked in blood. This was the world that President Bukele vowed to change. His approach? Zero tolerance. Bukele's administration moved swiftly, introducing a crackdown unlike any the country had seen. Gangs that had once acted with impunity found themselves hunted, their operations dismantled, their influence choked off. CICOT became the ultimate weapon in this campaign, a physical manifestation of the government's determination to end MS-13's reign. Security at CCOT is meticulous, almost obsessive. Thousands of surveillance cameras monitor every movement, tracking each inmate with unyielding precision. Inside the command rooms, guards sit before walls of monitors, their eyes trained for the slightest hint of rebellion. If an inmate so much as glances suspiciously, guards are ready to intervene. No detail goes unnoticed. Nothing escapes the watchful eye of CCOT's security system. The silence within the facility is stifling. Prisoners are stripped of all ability to meet, to talk, to conspire. Unlike traditional prisons, where power structures form among inmates, CCOT's design isolates individuals to the extent that even a whisper becomes impossible. For MS-13 members who thrived on control, whose very identity revolved around dominance, this is the harshest punishment imaginable. But beyond the rows of cells and the hum of surveillance cameras, there's a chilling layer to El Salvador's mega prison: solitary confinement. It's extreme, dark, bare, and inescapable. Solitary here is not just isolation, but a deliberate push to break down inmates psychologically. International guidelines suggest that solitary should only be used as a last resort. Yet the mega prison's approach feels like it's skirting that line, teetering between necessary discipline and outright cruelty. It's a point of concern for human rights activists who worry the prison's method could easily blur into psychological torture. The El Salvadoran government, however, paints a different picture. Their argument is clear. In a country plagued by gang violence, drastic measures are necessary. From the government's viewpoint, this mega prison isn't just a containment facility. It's a fortress aimed at breaking the very backbone of gang networks. To them, this place represents power, control, and a way to bring back some sense of order to communities haunted by decades of violence. Yet what this prison represents on an international level is something else entirely. The United States, for instance, watches with a mix of approval and caution. As the origin point for many gang members, MS-13 included, who fled from Los Angeles streets to El Salvador, the U.S. has more than just a passing interest. Their stake is in regional stability, in pushing back against crime. But aligning with such a hard stance on incarceration is a slippery slope, one that could strain the balance between backing an ally and standing up for human rights. The heart of the debate comes down to a universal question: when fighting crime, where's the line between justice and cruelty? Can locking up gang members in a prison city solve the problem? For the El Salvadoran government, the mega prison is their best bet at crippling these syndicates. They believe the threat posed by gangs requires an extraordinary response, no matter how severe. But critics argue that locking people up under such harsh conditions, without rehabilitation or reintegration efforts, could backfire, feeding the cycle of violence rather than ending it. That's the danger. A facility so extreme could breed hatred, turning prison walls into the incubators of more violence. Without paths to rehabilitation, releasing inmates back into society could simply mean unleashing more hardened, bitter individuals. There's also the risk that the sheer size of this operation might disconnect inmates from society on a deeper level, fueling resentment and radicalizing them further. The future looks tense and unpredictable. Beneath the towering walls and barbed wire, the very purpose of incarceration comes under scrutiny. Should prison be purely punitive, a form of punishment, or should it aim to reform? In this prison, there's no question which side wins out. With its relentless focus on containment and discipline, the mega prison leans heavily toward punishment, and that choice stirs up ethical concerns about the state's role in shaping the lives of those it incarcerates. El Salvador now finds itself on a global stage with this prison. The prison casts a long shadow not just over gang members, but over the entire country's image. Will it become a story of victory against gang culture, or a warning of the perils of extreme justice? The influence on gang dynamics may be dramatic, but no one can predict the final impact. In theory, cutting off gang communications and separating members should weaken their control. However, only time will tell if this bold gamble pays off. It might fracture gangs, weaken their grip on Salvadoran streets, and give citizens a break from violence. Yet, as citizens wrestle with mixed emotions, from relief to worry, the world is watching. El Salvador's approach to gang control, its stand against crime, has placed it at a crossroads. This country, once known for its natural beauty and civil strife, now wears the mantle of an experimental approach to justice. The mega prison, grand in design and ambition, might set a precedent, a model for other nations facing similar challenges. But if the prison goes down the wrong path, it could be a cautionary tale of human rights violations and heavy-handed justice. Still, nothing is guaranteed. Without tackling root issues like poverty, lack of education, and job scarcity, new generations might continue to fall under gang influence. Many young Salvadorans, disillusioned and with limited opportunities, might fill the void left by incarcerated gang members, perpetuating the cycle of violence the mega prison was meant to end. Some critics believe it's an unsustainable approach. Without support for community development and reintegration, gangs may find ways to adapt or regroup. Beyond its imposing walls, the megaprison's effects ripple outward. Families left behind, communities missing key figures, and strained local economies are some of the visible scars. The weight of these shifts affects everything, from labor markets to familial bonds, creating societal fractures that may take generations to mend. Families grapple with the absence of young men, often primary breadwinners, disrupting household stability and community structures. Ultimately, the financial demands of this massive institution raise questions about priorities. With limited resources, El Salvador risks sidelining critical public needs, education, healthcare, social services, in favor of funding its prison. Can it afford such a costly system without neglecting the country's broader needs? These investments are key to addressing the conditions that foster gang culture in the first place. This prison's true legacy will depend on its success in reducing crime without sacrificing human rights. As the world's gaze falls on El Salvador, it's more than just a prison. It's a test, one that could either set a precedent for criminal justice reform or serve as a stark reminder of the price of extreme measures.